how do you talk about emotions in a team with low trust? And I'm sure we might all be experiencing that, or we might all come across that with our clients. And the simplest answer for that is you just have to start really small. And by that, I mean, literally that exercise we run there, when leaders come to me and say, hey, we've got really low trust in our team, how do we start this conversation? I tend to say, let's potentially not start with a grandiose workshop and put them head first into it. Although I have done that and it's still been successful. If you want to build your own confidence and test it out and run some experiments, I always say, let's just implement the weekly retro or weekly intention setting exercise into the cadence of a team. So if the team meeting's on a Monday, you could then just simply start with, in a team with low trust, just asking them to pick a black card for how they felt last week. So not even going into the white cards, potentially. I've done that with teams where leaders said, we don't want to go into this yet. And I've said, okay, for the first 2 weeks, let's just pick a black card. So we introduce them slowly into this conversation rather than just leaping into it. And then by week 3 or 4, we then introduce the white card, because people are or familiar with the process of picking a card and sharing a story. And we've built up a little bit more connection and between each other. And then we move to this one. One time with the group where the leader was really adamant they didn't want to use the white cards, which as a side note, I push back on a lot and say that even if your team does have low trust, eventually it's really important to use these, because who's the psychiatrist? I'll never remember the name, but the saying is you have to name it to tame it. And there's a real interesting neurochemical process in your mind that happens when you talk about unpleasant emotions and how it reduces unpleasantness. So there's actually a Trojan horse for well-being that goes on in this game when we talk about these white cards. But what I got them to do to start with was just hold up the cards in their team. So not share a story, but just to go through and hold a card up. So everybody could look around, and more often than not, somebody else was holding up doubt or restless or anxious like you saw. And all of a sudden we create a bit of a connection there, even though we don't know the story. And then by week 3 and 4 of that, the leader then nudged the teams to then share a story. So it's sort of scaffolding a team into it. So ultimately with teams that you do think have really low trust, start small with either the weekly retro intention setting, and then a couple of months in or even a month in, when people are familiar with it, you can go, what if we tried something new? And you put it to the team that you use the cards in a different way, which is actually running the Map Your Emotional Culture workshop. So you can really scaffold a team through it and just start small and work your way up. Saying that, my general preference is to, I've learned this over time, and it was, excuse my language, but shit scary to begin with, but to dive straight into it, because you'll be really surprised by people's engagement and people's reaction to the game, despite the team having low trust, because they've just never been able to have this conversation before. And often that just that conversation is really inspiring and something they've never had before, which means that it's actually really powerful, even though counterintuitively you might think, oh, our team won't be ready for it. But it turns out most people I've used the game with over the 4 years are ready for it. They just didn't know how to do it. Yeah. So you've got a few options there, depending on your own level of comfortableness or bravery. I often find the leaders who don't want to have that conversation, it's their reaction to their teams rather than how their teams are actually feeling, which is an interesting thing in itself.